of times companies will take the work you did and be like, oh, that's neat, and never do anything with it. Not always, but that happens sometimes. So I think if you want to see how a lot of companies do a lot of things quickly, consulting's great. If you really want to see how to like make a product from start to finish, I think industry is a lot better.
This episode of Ken's Nearest Neighbors is powered by Z by HP, HP's high compute, workstation grade line of products and solutions. Today, I had the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Jacqueline Nolis. Jacqueline is a data science leader with over 15 years of experience in leading data science teams and projects at companies ranging from DSW to Airbnb. Today, she's the head of data science at Saturn Cloud. For fun, Jacqueline likes to use data science for humor, like using deep learning to generate offensive license plates. In this episode, we talk about some of the keys to breaking into the data science field, her book on the topic, and how she blends data and art in her side hustle. I hope you enjoy the episode. Jacqueline, thank you so much for coming into the Ken's Nearest Neighbors podcast today. We got introduced through a mutual friend, Chelsea, who has also been on the podcast and had just an awesome episode. Not that there's any competition, but I think, going back, it'll be nice to watch both of your episodes in tandem because a lot of really fun and exciting conversation topics. So how are you doing today?
Good. I'm just thinking about me and versus Chelsea in any sort of competition would be exciting to watch. But no, I'm doing good.
Chelsea and I have been talking about potentially competing on Sliced one day. And I think her, her approach to data science might not be super adaptive to the Sliced competition format.
So I was thinking too about like if I were a contestant on Slice, what would I do? And I do think I don't think I'd be there to win. I think I'd be there to have a good show on my way out. Like I crash and burn in a very exciting way.
I have this, we talked a little offline. I have like a wildly competitive streak. So I think I would go into just hardcore training mode a month out. Just do, and I've told Nick and Meg that I am planning to compete in season 3. So I have some time to prepare, but you never know how it goes. It's fun and it helps to grow the community, which is all we can really ask for, right?
Yeah. Did you know that I was once a reality TV show contestant and won a TV show?
I did not. Which TV show was that?
It's called King of the Nerds. It is actually how I met my partner, Heather Nolis. But yeah, we were both contestants on the show. It was nerdy competitions of like engineering and trivia and stuff. And yeah, I ended up winning. I threw her under the bus. It was very dramatic. And then she came back and helped me. And then I won. So yeah.
That is so cool. Maybe one of the coolest how you met your significant other stories that I've heard. How many people say that?
Okay, here's the thing though, is that it's always awkward because like if you're in a group of couples and they're like, well, where'd you meet? And you're like, oh, we met on reality TV. Then boom, that's the next half hour is just talking about that. So like
never run out of things to talk about.
Yeah, that's right.
So as exciting as, well, probably not as exciting as your experience on reality TV.
It's a different podcast.
Yeah, I would love to hear, just to get you more acquainted with the audience, how you first got interested and involved with the data science domain. Was it, one pivotal thing, like one moment where you're like, wow, I just saw this experiment and it was crazy and now I'm hooked? Or was it this slow progression over time?
No. Okay. So it was like, I went to college and I started as an electrical engineering major. And I almost immediately, like one semester in, was like, wait, I don't like physics and I don't like like this is not going to be fun. I'm like, well, what do I do like? I like math. So I switched to being a math major. And then people are like, well, what are you going to do with that math degree? Are you going to be a teacher? And I'm like, I don't want to be a teacher. And then I was like, well, I keep hearing about people using math, and this is like in the mid 2000s, like, oh, I keep hearing about people using math to help businesses. I want to use math to help businesses. And I had no further concept of what that meant at the time. And no one else did either, in the sense that like data science wasn't a field yet. But eventually I got some internships and then I got a job as doing analytics, which is what we would now call data science. But like I started at an e-commerce company helping with forecasting and things like that. And eventually that became the field of data science kind of popped up around what I was doing. But like, I never was like, oh, I'm going to shoot to be a data scientist. I'm mostly like, I want to do math and I don't want to be a professor. Where does that leave me? And that it turns out that was in data science.
I really enjoy that approach because it is so different from sort of my experience is I was on the other side, is like I love these domains. Like I love answering questions around sports and some of these other things. And I've found that math, computer science, these fields were sort of a means to an end to get me to these problems. I love talking to people who are sort of on the flip side, where the math is what's fascinating to them, the problem solving and the approaches within that domain, and saying, hey, I love this field. How do I go the opposite direction and apply it outward?
Yeah, I would just say, so I've a couple times in my career now worked at a company that does something I really like. It's like, I think airplanes are really cool. And I worked in an aerospace company, and I thought video games were cool back before I had a kid and had time to play video games. And I worked at like a video game company. And like, I think that I found no correlation between the topic I'm doing data science about, the interest in that versus how interesting the actual job is. Like, I have no correlation. It's not like, oh, cool, airplane regressions are extra fun. Like, I don't know. Like, I have not had that connection. And I think that surprised me, because I would have assumed I'd have more fun with a topic I was interested in. But
that's very interesting. So I've seen that in some places where I've worked and not in others. So when I was in college, I got an internship at the PJ Tour, right? I loved golf. I wanted to be involved there. And it was in corporate marketing. It had nothing to do with analytics. And I was like, this corporate marketing here is the same as corporate marketing anywhere else, right? It's like it's going to be the same. It's not like I'm interacting with players. It's not like I'm in this domain. But once I got into data science, like the work I do in golf now, that golf data is so much more interesting to me than I would say like train data. I worked at a large one of the largest train manufacturing companies, and just the subject area knowledge, like the understanding of the domain, it was so much harder for me to pick up. And I think that that's where the crossover for interest with me like fell apart. And I think it's really interesting hearing your perspective on that, because again, this might be hypothesizing, but maybe if you're coming more from the passion about the techniques and the interest, like the idea of applying them in general is just very exciting, right?
Well, sorry. So I'd say two things. Sorry, I cut you off. It's very
no, go
I
ahead.
grew up in New England. This is just what we do there. One is, you mentioned you work at a train yard. When I was from ages like 3 to 5, the only outfits I would wear were like train conductor outfits. I like trains so much. So I think that actually sounds like a dream job for me. Just there you go. But also, I think there's something about like, if you're doing golf data science and like how players go, you can't go to like a supermarket store and like use golf. There's no like equivalent there. But if I'm churn modeling at an aerospace company, that's kind of the same thing as churn modeling at a grocery store or churn model. So I think it's like, I think there probably are some domains where you really can't pass it around, but I would say it's got to be like 95% of data science is the same thing at every company, you know?
I would 100% agree with you on that front. I think that is one of the, I guess, sort of cool things about the field, is that the skill set is transferable. And then in my mind, to make you really good at your role in any company, it's finding that 5% that isn't necessarily the same, or the iteration on like those little small tweaks that make aeronautical aeroscience, I mean data science, different from train engineering data. Those probably have a lot, maybe less than 5% of difference, but I digress. I would love to hear you just talked about how there are so many different sort of data domain industries and I guess like styles within the field that you went through. I'd love to hear a bit more about sort of a career progression and a little bit about what you picked up on the way.
Yeah. Okay. So I got my undergrad and master's in math. And then I'm like, I don't want to be a professor. I want to go into industry and help companies use math to make money. And so then I worked for a little bit, first at like an e-commerce company, helping with their forecasting. And I would say there I learned that like, I don't know, I came out of school being like, math can do anything. And then I very quickly realized these forecasts are just kind of drawing a line on some data. And then some business people be like, well, that didn't account for the sale of last year, so I'm going to adjust it manually. Like, I don't know, like it was an interesting collision with reality on how much like humans still have to be involved in decisions. But anyways, then I worked for a bit at an aerospace company. And then at that point, I realized, you know what, like this is too much. Like I want to do more technical stuff. This is too much. Like this doesn't feel technical enough of work for me. Although in retrospect, it was pretty technical. But at the time, I'm like, no, I want even more technical stuff. So then I went and got a doctorate in industrial engineering with a focus on like electric vehicle routing. So if you're Tesla, where do you put your charging stations? So it's like an operations research kind of problem. And during that time, I started working on the side at a consulting firm, like a little tiny consulting firm. And so I finished my PhD. I was like, okay, I'll work at that consulting firm full time, which got bought by a different consulting firm. And so then I kind of got a consulting for a while. I did that, eventually became director of data science at a consulting firm. And then I left that firm and worked as an independent consultant for about 2 years. So consulting on my own. And then a pandemic hit and I decided, I think I better go back. Consulting is really stressful when you're working on your own. I'm going to go back to having a steady paycheck. And since then, I've been a principal data scientist and a head of data science and kind of done more standard data science-y stuff instead of the consulting work. And that I would say is my loose career progression.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So I am more on the consulting side now. I'd be interested to hear what your perspective is on the difference between doing data science consulting and more of a mainstay data science role.
So I think when I was starting in consulting and before I got into consulting, I'd be like, consulting is the most fun data science because every 2 months you have a whole new data science problem to solve for a company. And then you provide them a really cool solution, then you move on. And since then I have changed. And now I'm more on I like working in industry more, like an industry job, because you really get to see the whole problem through, like coming up with the idea and then coming up with the model and then putting it in production and then seeing how customers like it. And I think consulting, you kind of, a lot of times you do cursory work, like you help out a little, but like you don't get to see the whole thing through. And a lot of times companies will take the work you did and be like, oh, that's neat, and never do anything with it. Not always, but that happens sometimes. So I think if you're like, if you want to see how a lot of companies do a lot of things quickly, consulting's great. If you really want to see how to like make a product from start to finish, I think industry is a lot better. And so like my tastes have changed as my career has too.
I think the amount of iteration you do learning wise is that the loops are quicker with consulting to start out with. Although I did not like my earlier consulting days, I feel like I learned a lot really quickly. And as I've progressed through my career and I've just gotten older, I guess, I've started to realize how much I liked the rest of the process. One of my biggest challenges is that I really am someone that likes to see things through, and consulting directly conflicts with that a lot of the time. And for better for worse, like all of my clients I've worked with for years, so it's kind of like a little bit of a different story, but definitely a different style.
Yeah, I would also say with consulting, it is possible that depending on which consulting firm you're at, is that like you will just get like 10 companies that each ask you to do the same thing over and over again for them. And you know, like so it's possible that you get pretty quick, like you learn a lot, but then you kind of get stuck in a, okay, now I'm consulting on the same thing again and again. Which can happen in industry too. But I think before then I had this idea of like consulting every day is always different. And I'm like, I don't think that's quite true. And I think there are industry jobs where things can change around each day. So it really varies.
Well, you bring up a really interesting point, and it's that sometimes if you're in the consulting space and you get really good at something, maybe it's just creating Streamlit dashboards or something along those lines, you get asked to do that more and more, and that becomes more and more of your work a lot of the time. And if you want to do other stuff, if you want to pivot from that, sometimes it's less cost effective for a company to have you do other work, even if it's more exciting to you. Usually probably not as, I don't know if I'd stay at a company like that, but you can find yourself being pigeonholed if you get really good at something, which is kind of a sad thing in that specific domain.
That's true. I don't know if I ever got that good at a thing, but I do think you're right. Yeah.
Well, I am interested. I mean, obviously, you've been through a couple different positions here, and I would imagine that you did learn some new things, and you probably.
Goodness, I hope so. Yeah, I really hope.
Yeah. I would wonder what it was like transitioning companies and across all the different roles that you've had, and what were some of the surprises that came out of each of those. You don't have to go into each of the individual changes, but what were some of the surprises going across different companies? Because something I really stress to people is that, and I could be wrong, is that data science is different between different industries. It's different from, between different companies of different sizes, but each individual role has unique characteristics. Although there are a lot of similar things you might be doing, the processes, a lot of the people you work with, the culture of different organizations, they vary so much between company to company, and it's a little bit difficult to articulate that or get people to have perspective on that.
So I would say, first off, just to be clear, I've changed jobs a lot. I think I've changed jobs. I don't think I've had a job for more than like 2 years, depending on how you count it. Something like I changed jobs a lot, for various reasons. Sometimes the company went under, sometimes, but I've changed more than average. And I will say there's kind of, each time I jump into a new job, it's like you never know what you're gonna get before you start. Like you can guess, but you never actually know, just because like an interview won't tell you what the job is really like for any number of reasons. But I feel like there's maybe like a 2 or 3 dimensional space that every job can go in. And like one axis, I think, is how interesting is the work, right? Like how like, oh, wow, I'm doing really cool modeling and blah, blah, blah. And I think that's a spectrum. And I think at the beginning of my career, I'm like, I always want to maximize that. I want to have the most interesting work. Which I don't know if I necessarily believe anymore. Another axis, I would say, is how toxic is the work environment. And I think some companies I've started out have been like really great, really nice people. And there's some companies that have been like really like cruel. And sometimes you don't notice right away which ones are the cruel. Sometimes you do, but sometimes you don't. And then I think there's maybe like, there's maybe one last axis, which is like how how good is the technology stack you're using? Like, is it your favorite programming language? Blah, blah, blah. But like, arguably that's even the same thing is interesting. But the point is like, you kind of like each job is kind of in this space somewhere, and every job is different. You don't really know till you join. And oftentimes you don't know till there 6 months really where it's going to settle. Sometimes you know like week 2, you're like, oh, this is a bad place. But sometimes you don't know. And sometimes you don't like realize how good it is until a little while in. And then I think you kind of also then run into this problem of like, when you've been there for a little while, trying to decide of like, okay, this isn't exactly what I'm going for, you know, like whatever, I was kind of hoping the tech would be more interesting, or like I'm kind of doing the same thing over and over. When is it time to leave? And it took me a while in my career to get away from the idea that there was always one right time to leave a job or not leave a job. And there's like a moral, like, oh, if you leave a job too early, that's bad. You're going to ruin your career. Or if you stick around too long, you're going to be miserable and you're just harming yourself by not leaving. And I think a lot of my career has been learning how to like let go of a lot of that like shame about any of these decisions. And that took a while, and I'm still, you know, working on that too a bit.
Do you have, obviously those 3 things are factors in your decision making. Do you have an approach you take, like questions you ask yourself when it is time, or like at this point a system around that, or a system to...
No, I don't. And I think anytime I've tried to come up with a system, it hasn't worked because every situation is so different. But there is kind of a like it's actually kind of like a journey, like with a company that I no longer, you know, like I'm like, okay, this isn't a right fit. Like a journey between being like, this isn't a right fit, but maybe you're just having a bad day, or like, but give it another month or 2 and maybe I'll turn around, to like, no, this is a bad job and it's going to stay a bad job and you need to act on that. I think knowing that those are 2 different points of like, hey, this is starting to feel bad, maybe I'll turn around, maybe you need to give it time. And then this is feeling bad and it is time to go. I think understanding those are 2 different points and trying to let yourself go through the mental journey to get to the second point, instead of getting here and having a panic attack, or getting here and being like, well, I haven't really given it a chance yet. Like, I think it's just been practice for me. But
interesting.
Yeah.
I again love hearing sort of perspective on like navigating those types of decisions. So for me, every single company that I ever worked at, it was essentially like, I'm here until like it's temporary, right? It's not something that I'm looking to do for a long time. I, for better or for worse, have always wanted to do more entrepreneurial things, and all of those things are like biding time until I can do things that I would have more control over. Hopefully you're not getting the too much of a glimpse into how much of a control freak I am, but
well, I would say, I mean, when I've had people work for me and they've decided that they don't want to, you know, they're taking new jobs. For me, I always feel like, oh, cool, you are doing something that's good for you, right? Like you don't go get a new job unless you're like, I think this will be better than my current job. So like, that's a nice thing. And like, it hurts for me as it makes my job as a manager a little bit trickier, but like, I like it when my employees have good things happen to them. And I try and remember that that is the right attitude to have when I leave. And if my bosses are upset when they leave, I'd be like, well, they maybe should have an attitude that's positive, like I do in these situations.
Yeah, I am a huge believer that it as a boss, it's important to be supportive of people, even if they want to step away.
Yeah.
For better, for worse, I could be working for that person that left one day if they're going to do some really impressive stuff. I mean, when I haven't been doing much hiring recently, but when I was hiring people, everyone I hired was someone that I would, in a weird way, like happily work for one day if they were doing something else or they were creating things. I don't know if that necessarily makes them a great data scientist in terms of I guess I was maybe assessing leadership qualities or indexing on that a bit too heavily, but I don't know. I think that it's important. I'm a believer in like a little bit more connection with your coworkers. I know that there's some, like, culturally, some places are like, mostly internationally, like some are very soft cultures where all business is done over drinks or with communication, and there's like song and dance. I think Japan is one of those, and then there are other where it's like strictly business. I think I read a book a while ago on this, and maybe I index a little bit more on the community at work. Have you
I'm
seen?
a strictly business person. I don't like, no
Interesting.
offense to like everyone in the world, but like if my company's doing company happy hour, come out with us. I'd be like, like, don't want to come out for company happy hour. Nothing against everyone at the company, but like I have a wall of business time and everything outside of it is like my time. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, no, I see.
Yeah.
I 100% respect that. I don't think. I think one of the reasons why I really personally struggled in like more structured corporate settings is I couldn't really turn that off. The way that my life works is that my day job, the content that I produce, my leisure activities, everything is like smushed together, which for better for worse is, I mean, I think it really depends on who you are, if that works for you or not. And I had to build structures in my life or choose a career path where I felt like that could all work like symbiotically rather than antagonistically. And I think that that's like a kind of different strokes for different folks type of thing, where if if you know that about yourself, and that's like the walls that you set or the lines that you draw, that's so important. I think I'm sort of sensing a theme that there's a lot of individuality and uniqueness around jobs, around individual choices, and navigating those is maybe a little easier said than done.
Yeah, I think so. It takes practice too.
I would also like to touch on perhaps a little bit more of your individuality. You do have a pretty cool Etsy store. You do quite a lot of art at the
Oh yeah.
intersection of data science, and I'd love to learn more about your foray into that. I mean, I wouldn't consider myself an artist, but I do consider myself a creative.
Mm.
And I love hearing about how other people's creative side connects with something that I guess is creative in its own right, but maybe in a little bit different way with data.
Um, so I will say that I don't know, my whole life I've been, I would say, somewhat artistic. Like I do like I did like art growing up and things like that. And I did like pottery summer camp or whatever. But like I never really like tried my hand at like doing a lot of art. And then back last year when the quarantine started, it's like, oh my goodness, we're all gonna be stuck in our houses. What is everyone gonna do? Like, are you gonna pick up a new hobby? And I'm like, I am gonna pick up a new hobby. I'm gonna do something for me. I'm gonna really get into art. I started with oil pastels and then I switched to watercolors and gouache too. But I started doing art and I'm like, what I'm not going to do is let this be like all my other hobbies. I'm going to quickly monetize it and make it not fun and just like a weird capitalist thing like I've done with everything else in my free time. This is me coming off of just having written a book with Emily Robinson, which was me taking a year of my free time and turning it into an avenue of capitalism. But regardless, and also I liked writing the book and everything. Anyway, but I'm like, I'm going to actually learn to do some art. And so I started doing some art. I like, it was, like I was getting into it a bit. And then I did that for a while. And like, I don't know, I posted on my Instagram or whatever. And then actually friend Chelsea tweeted, oh, I would love an art piece that's like a landscape, but with all different statistics things in it. I'm like, oh, I'll paint that for you. And so I gave her the original and I started selling the prints of it on Etsy. And then people like that. So I started selling like more. And then it turns out that there was a fairly good demand, which was fun. Like it was fun to like 95% of the art I make is unrelated to data science, but I throw a couple of data science things out there and put them on Etsy and have a little store for it, which is fun, although totally going against the original goal I had of not turning this into a hobby that I turn into a capitalist thing. But I don't know, it's been fun and not like a huge like mental drain to get the capitalist part of it running.
Well, I think that there's a difference between starting something with the intention of turning it into a capitalist thing and starting something without that intention. And I think that if things transition into like being able to turn a profit for you, that's not a problem. But again, if you go into an artistic endeavor, mostly artistic endeavor, with the goal of profit, that can be a bit challenging. I mean, for example, like the YouTube stuff that I've done, I had no intention or any belief that I would ever be able to monetize that. I did it because it was fun. I did it for myself. And over time, it's become something that does make me money. But if I had started with that as the goal, I probably wouldn't have made it very far.
Well, and I say capitalist, but what I guess maybe what I mean is like seeking the attention of others, right? So like, let me give you a concrete example. Like at one point years ago in like 2016, I met a website that would let you take two Twitter accounts and mash them together and see what like if those two Twitter accounts were the same account, what would the tweets look like? It was called Tweet Mashup. I made it, didn't like spent a year, like made it, never published or anything, waited a year. Then I'm like, oh, I guess I'll put this on the internet. And it went crazy viral. It had like millions of views. It had people like the CEO of T-Mobile, like with 3 million followers tweeting about it and stuff. And the site was totally overwhelmed with traffic and kept going down. And I had like panic attacks. And I was like so invested in what people thought of me and the site that like it became a huge part of my my mental, like I couldn't do anything but think about the site for like 2 weeks straight. And that was not healthy or good. And I think that I just as a person, I'm very easily like, oh my God, I want to use this hobby to get the validation of others. And I think me doing art has been me trying to do a bit of like, I do not care so much about the validation of others. And it's nice when people buy my art prints and that. And please, if you're out there, please, I do like it and you buy the art prints. But also I want to make sure this is a hobby where like I can just paint a boat in the sunset and I don't have to worry that people will like it or not like it. It's just for me.
This episode of Ken's Nearest Neighbors is brought to you by Z by HP. HP's high compute, workstation grade line of products and solutions. Z is specifically made for high performance data science solutions, and I personally use the ZBook Studio and the Z4 workstation. I really love that the Z line can come standard with Linux, and they also can be configured with the data science software stack. With the software stack, you can get right into the work of doing data science on day one without the overhead of having to completely reconfigure your new machine. Now back to our show. I really like that. That's something I think anyone that has any form of internet presence, they either struggle with it or they face it at some point in time. And it's how do you detach from what other people detach your self-worth or your value from what other people perceive you as. And I mean, there's plenty of nice things that are said about me on the internet. There's also plenty of not so nice things. And I mean, you remember very few of the nice ones and you remember almost all of the bad ones. And it's a very interesting spot to be, where you have to evaluate if other people saying mean things about you are right or wrong. And I mean, almost always they're wrong, but it isn't, I think, at a broad level great for any form of mental health or stability on that front.
Yes. And I will say I spend a lot of time on twitter.com. I'm trying to spend less because I don't think it's great for me. But I do think when I'm on twitter.com, I try and avoid letting my Twitter account just be me saying the things that I think will get the most likes. Not because I think that's inherently a bad thing to do, but because I know I personally, like, it doesn't help. I don't feel emotionally fulfilled. I don't want to feel emotionally fulfilled by the number of likes my tweets get. And so I think that's just something I try and put a lot of thought into. And I don't know, I find it something about like social media and like, I don't know, my particular like neurodivergent mind or whatever. Like, I really notice I have to think about this stuff a lot, so I don't let it consume me. Also, I just grabbed some random pictures I do so you can see. Oh, you can see there's some windmills in
some
Oklahoma.
wind turbines.
And yeah, see, this is the most of what I do with stuff like this. Here's an airport. This is DFW. Most of what I do is stuff like that and not data science stuff.
Did you do that in the airport?
I sure did while waiting for a layover. It was like I had like 30 minutes, so I just kind of winged it. That's it. Yeah.
One of my, I really try not to consume social media that much, but I went down a really aggressive rabbit hole the other day where I forget the guy's name, but he draws people on the New York subway and then he gives them the picture of themselves.
Yeah.
And I love the idea of like, I mean, I guess it's really, that's how art used to be, is you're there and you paint or draw what you see. But I feel like we're sort of diverging from that quite a bit in 2021. And I don't know, I like the idea of doing something in real time, sort of forcing yourself to be in the moment or to absorb and understand and everything that's in front of you. I think if we were able to do that a bit more just in general, it would be a really positive thing. Are there some systems in play? I'm like a big systems thinker. If you haven't, if that hasn't come across, are there any things that you do or you ask yourself when you're using social media to help you to get away from that mindset of, am I doing this for validation or am I doing this for myself? You know, something that, an example is a lot of the videos that I make, I have a list of the ones that I want to make and a list of the ones that essentially I've pulled and people would like me to make. And I try to find the intersection of where, hey, this is something that I'm very passionate about. And although others might not be as interested in, it'll be really exciting for me to make this either way. And that's like a little bit of the process that I use. You know, are there, again, things that perhaps could help other people if they're facing something similar where, you know, like, am I doing this for likes or am I doing this because it's something I want to have out in the world?
Okay, so a couple of things. I will say, I guess, I mean, I don't mind doing things for likes. What I try and do is make sure that I am being vulnerable and authentic, which is to say, I think there are some, like Twitter accounts where you could read like, 100 of their tweets and not know like if they were happy or sad or if they're blah, blah, blah. Like, like you just like, it's hard to understand like what's going on at them as a person. I try and be a person who really puts that stuff out there. If I am frustrated, I will express that, and I think that there are times where I make tweets that get like no likes because of that or whatever. Like, like sometimes it's not always the big misses. And I think that helps me personally. I think I could be better at that, but I think that stuff kind of helps me. And I also say when it comes to like writing blog posts and stuff, I don't know if this is actually like improving my like sense of self-worth or anything, but I think there are a lot of people out there writing like intro stuff for data scientists. Like, how do you start with pandas? How do you blah, blah? And I think a lot of that is there's so many more people out there who want to be data scientists than are data scientists. Not to say that those people who want to be data scientists are anything less, but like that's a huge audience. And I think it is good that there's lots of material out there to help them. But I don't want to be another one of those. I find it a lot more interesting to have discussions for like, okay, let's talk a little bit more about the nuance of data or like how do you deal with logging into Twitter from Shiny, like our Shiny app, something like that. Like that's not going to get me the most likes, but it is a topic I'm interested in. It's a topic that I know a few people will be fascinated by, and I'm focusing less on the pure number of likes and more just like, am I writing stuff that I think will be helpful to some other people? It doesn't have to be the most people, but it just has to be some set of people. And I found that of like, write stuff that I think is interesting and that will help some people. I find that really works well for me. And then trying to avoid just what will get me the most views, because I find when I write content like that, it's usually just kind of bland. It doesn't have my personality in it. But again, really not no digs at people who do find that to be the most meaningful way for them to write. That just doesn't work for me.
No, I mean, there's a constant battle every time I produce content between what I think an algorithm would like, what I think a main consumer of my content will like, what I think a prospective consumer of my content will like, and what I would like to make. I mean, those are all factors that go into any of those things. And it's this weird trade-off between, okay, I would like to make something, or at least some of my videos, I'd like them to be popular enough that they get in front of new eyeballs, because I think, or I would hope, that anything I'm producing is creating value and is educational and informative. But I also want the content to be as high quality as possible, as, not redundant or anything along those lines. And there's this, weird conflict of interest. There are these weird intersections around everything that we produce that makes that more and more difficult. With the additional, I guess, self-imposed constraints that we have.
Yeah.
Switching gears just a little bit, I would love to know what some of the topics are within the data science domain that you don't think are being talked about enough. Obviously we're focusing a lot on the beginners. A lot of my content is focused on beginners, but I really enjoy making content that is upstream a little bit more. And I also like understanding, or looking out for what I don't know, or what I should be learning about a little bit more.
So I would say the biggest thing that I kind of feel like we don't talk enough about is this kind of meta data science questions. So for instance, I'm giving a keynote on Friday at a conference, and the whole point of it is to talk about when is it appropriate to take risks as a data science team. So if a stakeholder comes to your data science team being like, hey, we would like to build a churn model on our customers so that we can send sales to them, when is it the right time to say, hey, we should try to build that model, versus, we don't think we'll ever be able to succeed at that model. For whatever reason, we don't think that model will work, so we don't want to try it. These sorts of risks, I think, are hugely important for data science teams. We don't really talk about them philosophically much. Or here's another example. Suppose you are doing analytics for marketing, and you find out that people in Dallas spend more on their first purchase. No, let's not even say that. People who buy cheese pizzas in their first purchase at a restaurant are more likely to make a second purchase than people who do not buy cheese pizzas in their first purchase. Let's say that fact you discover in the data. Does that mean A, you should take cheese pizzas and give them for free to all the people in the second group, because having a cheese pizza in your first purchase means you're more likely to do that? Or B, should we advertise more to the people who get cheese pizzas because we know they have more potential? Or C, should we advertise to the people who don't get cheese pizzas in the first purchase because there's more opportunity because they're not spending it? There's so many ways you could take that one piece of information of having a cheese pizza means you're going to spend more and act on it. And generally, we as data scientists will tell a marketing team, hey, the cheese pizza people spend more. And then we will wash our hands of the problem and be like, you marketing decide what to do with that. But that's a huge thing. And if marketing people take that fact we've made and then decide to act on it in a way that hurts the company, that is bad for us. And I think that's a meta data science question of when you discover a fact, how do you decide to present it and act on it and back it up? Should you even present that fact at all? And I don't think we talk about that as much as we talk about how to fit models well. And that's the kind of stuff that I think about all the time, this sort of data science business meta questions. And I find that stuff fascinating. I don't think we talk about it enough as a field.
Those are some, we must be cut from the same cloth on that front. Those are some of my favorite questions to ask. One thing that I am constantly seeing in industry, especially with emerging data science teams, is that there's a conflict between how management, business stakeholders understand data science and the reality of the domain. And I'm sure I would expect that you've seen this as well, especially with new teams. Data science, for the most part, is not something that can happen overnight. I mean, sometimes you get lucky with a model that is a low-hanging fruit and it produces a lot of value. But I've always viewed data science, particularly in my domain, as something where you make these couple percentage, 0.5% improvements over a lot of time, and over the long run they create tremendous, incredible value. But that's contra to how businesses make decisions, right? It's hard to project specific ROI on projects like that, and we find that teams get, essentially they lose their funding, people get fired if things don't happen on a quarter-to-quarter basis. And I think that there's a cool intersection of how do we scope projects, how do we evaluate risk, because that conversation around data science, from what I've seen, is almost non-existent in at least a lot of the companies that I've worked with.
Yeah, and to your point, sometimes the person who has to take the risk is the person who hires the data science team in the first place. So if I'm like, I'm going to hire a team of 5 people to support my division of the company by building models that do blah, blah, blah. And then you get hired on that team and you're like, oh my God, we would never be able to build models that do blah, blah, blah. We don't have the data for it, or blah, blah, like the method of, and like, that's awkward. That's not great. How do you handle that? I think that would fall in this realm of things we could talk about more.
I have a interesting hypothetical that I would love your perspective on. Obviously, it's not going to be like there's I don't think there's a right answer to this question, but let's say you are in that scenario where you you're the first data science manager that a company's hired. You've hired this team, and you're in this situation where maybe the CEO heard data science are like, oh, we need this team, we're going to bring them all on, and then you're at ground zero where you don't have good data infrastructure. You're that you can't fulfill a lot of the requests because there just isn't that capability. I mean, aside from just leave, is there anything that you can really do in that front?
So I will say I've been in situations like that before,
That's
more
fine.
than once. It's not great. Comes with the territory of being the first data scientist in a company. But I've been in that situation before. It is not great. The thing I always do, I don't know if it's the best or the worst, but it's what I always do, is I always am open and honest and talk to the company about it. So like the person who hired me, I'd be like, look, I don't think the data science is going to work here for reasons X, Y, and Z. We're like, hey, but it's better not just say things don't work. Be like, here's what we could do. Here's some opportunities. Here's what we would do to be able, here's what we would need to be able to do what you are suggesting. Let's talk about how we could get it. Having those conversations quickly, openly, it gets you a lot of goodwill, I find. And if it turns out, and in some situations, this has happened to me, where I'm like, what you're asking for, like, is like impossible for data science to do what you're asking. We would need X, Y, and Z, which we do not have, and you do not seem like you're trying to get us those things right now. Do you have any plan to get them? Occasionally that gets responded with a, we are choosing to ignore you because that doesn't go along with our worldview. And then in those situations, I'm like, okay, we don't see it eye to eye. That's fine. I won't be here anymore. And I have left companies for that reason. But usually, I mean, people want you to succeed. And if you're a data scientist being like, I can't succeed because of reason XYZ, help me fix it, people want that to be fixed. So like having that open and honest conversation, I find is just very good.
I really liked what you just said about people wanting you to succeed. I think that that's something that a lot of the times we forget throughout the entire data science process and pipeline, starting from interviewing all the way through the whole thing. I mean, every candidate that comes in, like I want them to be the person that I hire. That saves me a lot of time. That makes a lot of really good things happen. Is there something that we can learn about maybe the interview process or the career from just the idea that most people, I would say almost everyone in the companies that we work for, they want us to succeed. Like they want us to come in, help make more money, whatever that might be.
Yeah, I don't know. I think a lot of the work I've done as a data scientist is just trying to get my goals to align with the people around me. So if people want me to succeed and they themselves want to succeed, how do we make sure those are like on the same thing and not opposite things, right? Like if they want the things to succeed by doubling the size of the call center and data science succeeds if we don't need a call center anymore, well, that's not good, right? Like, or like, we're not going to get along then. Like, so how can you kind of get these things to work together? I think that's just a lot of the job, especially as you get the more senior levels, that just becomes so much of what you do.
Interesting. I sort of have that view about any form of relationships, is that if there is something that at the end, right, like sort of a guiding light that is in line, things are going to likely work out, or they have a high percentage chance of. But if in let's say in my current relationship, if I'm like an animal conservationalist, and my significant other is like the biggest poacher of all time, like that's probably not going to work out. And just looking early on and seeing if your views or your guiding light is in line with your company's, your boss, or the people around you. Something I should probably start doing more in every business relationship, or anything that I really have.
There are books about this. There's a book, I forget, either getting to yes or difficult conversation. There are books, like negotiation books, talk about this a lot, about like trying to figure out where you align, sort of a thing. Like it's a very businessy kind of topic.
I'm reading Think Again right now by Adam Grant, and he touches on that just a little bit. It's very, very good book for those who haven't explored it yet. There's a very interesting chapter later in the book that I've been told about why people are not receptive to the vaccine, and the psychology of that, which I'm very excited about reading, because from a data perspective, not something I can really wrap my head around, the antithesis or the opposite of that logic, but who knows. I would also love to hear about your current role. This is something we've talked about a little bit offline, and it seems like it's a really good fit. You're loving the work that you're doing, and I'd be interested in understanding, one, a little bit more about what you do on a day-to-day basis, and two, more about how like what is a good data science culture and team. What are some of the characteristics that domain might have, or that workspace might have?
Yeah, so I currently am the head of data science at Saturn Cloud. Now at Saturn Cloud, we're building like a platform for data scientists. So the idea being, you log into Saturn Cloud, you can spin up a notebook on an instance with a CPU or a GPU. And if it's a GPU, it's all pre-configured. You can have that work with a cluster of computers with like Python and Dask. And just basically the whole point being like really trying to remove the annoying things about being a data scientist, like setting up CUDA drivers, or your code is so big you can't run it on one machine and you have to like get a parallel cluster working. Being able to have that happen for you instantly, and having the same environment that your coworkers have. Like we're trying to remove a lot of these pain points without doing them in a way that becomes annoying, like still making it so you can use Git the way you want to, or the command line, or Docker, like still work with all these technologies, as opposed to making it so simple that you actually can't do your job anymore. So that is what we are building. We are, selling it, and companies are using it and liking it. And I would say if you are a data scientist and are struggling with things like just getting GPUs to work, or distributed computing, or you want your team to have a shared platform that works nicely, you should check out Saturn Cloud. And yeah, so I'm the head of the data science team. And on the data science team, what we do is we help customers use the platform. We help guide the product, because it is a product for data scientists. So we have the best ideas in terms of like, what are the customers actually going to want to use it for? And we also do things like conferences and talks and blog posts. So it's kind of like, I really enjoy it. This is the first time I've ever made a product that I personally might use. So it's just been a very interesting situation. And yeah, I really enjoy working there. It's a nice small startup. We have a really cool team, and we are, I will say, still hiring more people for the data science team. So if you're looking to listen to this and you're interested in a data science position, you can check out our website. We got some there too.
Awesome. I'll definitely link that in the description below. Something that I find really interesting, and I've personally struggled with, is when you're building a product that you are planning to use, how do you sort of untangle your own biases from that? How do you understand what the market wants rather than what you might necessarily really value in the product, if that is different than what the general market would want?
So I find that's a fascinating question, because I think like the on paper answer is like, listen to your customers, do focus groups, look at data. But when you're a startup, I think this is true in general, especially startups, but like it's actually often very hard to have data, right? Like even if you have analytics within your tool on like who's doing what, really trying to make meaning out of that is pretty tricky. So I think at some level, you always kind of have to take a leap of faith that like you can somewhat a little guess what people might want to use this for. But that being said, it is so helpful to have customers who are responsive, and like even like they don't have to come with you like, here, I have this great suggestion. They have to come with you like, hey, this thing's annoying. And you're like, oh, I believe you. Let me figure out how to fix it. The bad attitude is, it's not annoying. You're annoying. Like, right. Like just not having that. And instead really just being open. And like, we've gotten some really cool ideas, both from customers being like, it would be nice if it had this feature. And also customers being like, I just can't figure out, like, I just don't understand where you expect me to click to figure this out. Or like worse, we're on a conference call with them and they're trying to like, I can watch them go around the screen and I'm like, I know the button is right there and you're not pressing it. And it's like, okay, maybe the button needs to change, not this person. So a lot of like trying to work with customers and understand their needs, as well as just accepting that at some level it has to be based on my like, my team's gut intuitions rather than like, we can't make everything purely data driven.
Yeah, well, I think that there's something interesting that I just kind of, I guess occurred to me, is that when you don't have data, there's a huge value in scientific method and hypothesis testing, right? When we're using that, we're putting something out there, we're making an expectation, and in a certain case that could be a prototype, right? And we get to see how people respond to whatever we put out there, and we get data on if that was a good idea or not. I mean, it might be more expensive to build, but with, in 2021 going forward, it's easier and easier to prototype every single day. And historically, I've always been of the approaches like, survey or I think iterative approach or design thinking is important, but.
So I haven't personally like seen like A/B testing be that useful at companies I've worked at, which is to say, I feel like the important decisions are generally such big departures, it'd be almost impossible to A/B test them, right? Something like what is the fundamental philosophy of how this product should work, right? You can't A/B test, like, how should we have our customers conceptualize this? And I think also I've seen when people do run A/B tests, it's often for things so minute that like, it would take, like, it'd be very hard to take the correct amount of data to actually make that. Like if you're working at like a Google or like massive company, then yes, you can do experimentation, get like good amount of data. But like even a mid-sized company, it's a struggle to get enough scenarios where you can actually run experiments. So I think experimentation can be useful. I just think it's very tricky to use it right. But I will also say the thing that I think is the most helpful is just being able to iterate quickly. So if you do roll something out and your customers are like not feeling it, changing it around. The companies I've seen that struggle the most are like, well, we can't change this because it took us 6 months to get here and get it this far. And if you want to change it, then we have to go and redo 6 months of work. So you're going to have to stick with it how it is. Like that kind of not agile thinking, that really, like, I really am bought into the software development, like agile, quick iteration, like just keep things moving. I think that stuff is like test and prod, like really just get stuff out and see how it goes. I have found that personally very successful.
Yeah, I think I agree with you 100%. I think I misspoke a little bit in terms of scientific method. I think what I was focusing on is more if you get something in someone's hands, you're making a hypothesis around if they like it or not, and they can provide you feedback on a bunch of different aspects of it rather than doing all the research up front, because there's nothing for them to base their thoughts off of. If they have something concrete and tangible, they can actually give you an opinion on it. Whereas if you're talking about ideas and concepts, that's overwhelmingly more difficult to say if you like or you don't like, or you could hate the concept, but when you see how something works in the real world, you really, can fall in love with it. I hate to say that's what happened with a couple of cell phones I've had, is that I was like, oh, this is gonna be stupid. And then you look at it and you're like, wow, this works great.
Yeah, no, and sometimes it's amazing how often I'm like, this is going to be amazing. And then we roll it out and like, no, that actually wasn't as good as I thought. And then sometimes it'll be like, oh, let's just make this quick little change. It doesn't seem like a big deal. And then that suddenly is the difference. And like, I think about this a lot in data science. If like you compare all of the big, giant, complex models I've taken that have made, they take months to make, and then you take all of the times I've made, well, here's like a 5-minute chart just because you requested it. Of like, let me just show you what the revenue has been in the APAC region for the last year. I think the value from the last 5-minute charts that just kind of like, hey, let's quickly whip up a chart with data, has probably been more than all the models I've made. Maybe that's not quite true, but it's close to true. And I just think that there's a certain, yeah, certainly on a per hour basis. And I think it's easy when you're a data scientist to be like, it's only truly value creating if it is a hugely complex, intriguing model that like I get to, give a conference talk about. But like a lot of times the small stuff really is the most valuable. And your wins can come from everywhere, so don't just discount the small ones.
I agree, although I do see that raising a little bit of conflict within an organization. So in most teams that I've worked on, you have these longer term projects that you're working on, and then you have these ad hoc requests. Both are expected to be very valuable, but they are a constant battle for time. How do you manage those two different types of requests? I mean, from what you just said, like they're both inherently valuable. Even the ad hoc ones might be more valuable than some of the long-term ones, but there is like a trade-off in time and effort.
Well, yeah, and sometimes they're not valuable, right? Like sometimes the little ones, like you're getting all these ad costs here, so like there's no way this is actually like you're in charge of 1/10% of the corporate budget, and you're asking me for 10 times the charts as the rest of the like sometimes it's not all. So I think that's just a matter of good boundary setting, and I think managers like the goal of the job of a data science manager is to do exactly that, is to say, hey, I know you have a lot of ad hoc requests, but we also have a lot of other work to do. So can you just prioritize what are the important ones and we will try and get to those? That is the thing a manager would say, and a good data science manager knows how to say those things. So I would say if you are listening to this and you want to become a data science manager, I would just think about what are situations where you can enforce boundaries and be like, I'm going to make someone a little unhappy and not give them what they want for the good of everyone else.
Awesome. I want to be sensitive of your time, or I think
Sure.
we're a little over. Do you need to get going?
I got like a couple more minutes and
Okay, I have one last question on that
Sure.
front. This opened a huge can of worms in the management domain.
I know.
I think for a lot of companies, like the idea that business units are using data science teams and they're excited about it and they're sending in a lot of requests, like in theory, that's a good thing, right? You have buy-in, you have people that want to um, like use data as much as possible, maybe selfishly for their own units. But how do you at a high level prioritize those things? Like you don't want to discourage people from using it, but you also uh, don't have enough time to fulfill all the requests.
So I will say two things. One, this is what I was talking about earlier about data science risk. This is at some level you taking the risk, because when you're prioritizing, you're saying, I think this is more likely to be successful, but you don't know if that's going to be successful. And you don't really know if that ad hoc request is going to prove an interesting result that really changes the decision, or it's just going to give them another chart to put on the pile of things that all say the same thing, right? Like you don't know. So there's no like right way to do it. It's just about intuition and assessing risk. And then the other thing I would say is the idea that the more ad hoc requests you're getting, the more data-driven organization is, the better it is. I have found that companies being too data-driven is just as bad, maybe more dangerous than companies not being data-driven enough, which is to say I worked with a big company, and I remember there's like this potentially massive program that seemed like it seemed on its face like it'd be extremely valuable to the company. But because that was a data-driven company, they couldn't launch it until they had a financial projection on how well that was going to do. And the thing about big programs that no one's ever launched before and no one really, there's no evidence, there's no data. So your financial model is like, well, let's just throw some numbers in Excel and put a line chart there and call that the financial model. And then it's suddenly like, okay, you have built a financial model, we can launch that. But like, there was such limited data, like you could never know what's going to happen with a program before you launch it. And like that financial modeling didn't provide anything. All it did was, because the company was a data-driven thing, it let someone check off the checkbox of saying, okay, we had data. And like, is that company better than a company that said, hey, we know we could never even financially forecast this, so we're just going to roll it out and see how it goes? I don't know. And I think if your company is running into those scenarios all the time, then it's possible you're getting slowed down by this data drivenness that another company that was less data driven would make the same decisions as you, but much faster. So yeah, I think about that a lot too. And I think that would also put that in like the data science meta thinking that people should do more of.
Awesome. So those are all the questions I had today. One last thing, can you tell people how they can get in contact with you, or where they can find you? Also details about the speaking you're doing coming up. Hopefully this will be out before then.
So
and
I'm talking, and there might be a recording too. I'm talking this week at the Earl conference, which is in London. It's very exciting. It's funny actually. The first time I ever submitted a talk, like, here's my talk I want to give at a conference, it was at Earl Conf, and I was rejected. Oh, but that's fine. And now I'm the keynote and like, look, anyway, so that's at Earl Conf. I'm very excited about it. I think it's going to be a real fun talk. I'm excited to give. If you want to follow me on Twitter, which is where I do most of my like social media-ing, I'm on Twitter at Sky Tetra with an E. So it's SKYETETRA, or you can just search for Jacqueline Nolis. And my website with my talks and blog posts and everything is jnolis.com.
Awesome. I will link all of those below. I'll also link to your Etsy store. I'll also be purchasing some nice art. As you can tell, my room, I do have some stuff. I actually made the one in the middle, but it's
oh, that's nice.
It's not not
here it
quite
looks
to
great.
your level. Oh, it has a light up dinosaur in the middle. That's
Oh yeah,
I love dinosaurs. Just
nice.
something. But so thank you again so much for coming in, chatting with me, sharing your story with the Ken's Nearest Neighborhood. And until next time, I really enjoyed this.
Thank you for having me.